The air in the Siberian region of Yakutia didn't just chill you, it actively tried to crush your lungs. At -71 degrees Celsius, every breath felt like swallowing shattered glass. Trees didn't merely sway in the wind. Their sap froze and expanded until the trunks exploded with the sound of a gunshot. Fiona Mitchell, a senior wildlife biologist from Colorado, was intimately familiar with this brutal symphony. Stationed 50 miles outside the village of Oymyakon at an isolated ecological outpost, she had spent the last 4 months tracking the migratory anomalies of apex predators pushed off their normal routes by shifting climate patterns. Her cabin, a reinforced steel and timber bunker, was her only shield against the deadliest winter the region had seen in a century. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when the storm hit its peak. The anemometer on the roof was screaming, clocking wind gusts at 80 miles per hour. Fiona was sitting close to the cast-iron wood stove, nursing a mug of black tea, when she heard it. It wasn't the wind. It was a faint, desperate scrape against the heavy oak of her front door. It was followed by a raspy, mechanical squeak that barely penetrated the howling gale. Most people would have ignored it. Opening a door in a -71 degrees Celsius whiteout is essentially inviting death into your living room. But Fiona's instincts overrode her logic. She hastily threw on her expedition-grade down parka, pulled her thermal balaclava over her face, and shoved her feet into insulated boots. She unlatched the heavy deadbolts. The wind violently ripped the door from her grip, slamming it against the exterior wall and instantly plunging the cabin's entryway into a sub-zero vortex. Squinting through the blinding snow, Fiona shined her heavy-duty flashlight onto the small porch. There, half buried in a drift, was a clump of ice and matted fur no larger than a loaf of bread. It wasn't moving. Fiona fell to her knees, the cold already biting through her triple-layered pants, and scooped up the stiff mass. It felt like a block of solid granite. She kicked the door shut with all her might, throwing her body weight against it to engage the locks, and rushed to the rug in front of the stove. Under the warm glow of the fire, the ice began to glisten, revealing a distinct pattern of dark rosettes against pale, frost-bitten fur. Fiona gasped. It was an Amur leopard cub. This was physically impossible. Their habitat was nearly 1,000 miles south in the Primorsky Krai region. Yet, here it was, an impossible ghost in the taiga. The cub's breathing was so shallow it was virtually undetectable. Its core temperature was plummeting toward a fatal threshold. Fiona knew she couldn't just throw it in front of the fire. Rapid thawing would cause the blood vessels to burst, inducing a fatal thermal shock. Working with surgical precision, she grabbed a plastic tub from her supply closet and filled it with tepid water barely lukewarm. She submerged the cub's rigid body, keeping its head elevated. "Come on, little one," Fiona whispered, her voice trembling as she massaged the tiny chest. "You didn't come all this way just to quit." For 45 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The water grew cold, and she carefully replaced it with slightly warmer water. She prepared a syringe with a makeshift formula of powdered goat's milk and electrolytes. Suddenly, a violent shudder racked the cub's body. A pathetic, gargling cough erupted from its lungs, expelling icy fluid. Its icy blue eyes fluttered open, dilated and terrified. It was alive. By dawn, the cub, whom she affectionately dubbed Ghost, was swaddled in heated thermal blankets, aggressively sucking formula from the syringe. The crisis had passed for the leopard, but a new, far more terrifying crisis was about to begin for Fiona. At 8 a.m., the lights inside the cabin flickered and died. A deep, unsettling silence replaced the low, comforting hum of her external diesel generator. Fiona rushed to the frosted window. The fuel line, rated for -60 degrees Celsius, had become so brittle in the -71 degrees Celsius plunge that the intense winds had simply snapped it in half. She grabbed her satellite radio to call the regional base camp. "Dr. Sterling? Mason, do you copy? This is Fiona," Static hissed back at her. She tried again. "Mason, emergency. My main generator is down. I have backup wood for the stove, but it won't last the storm. Do you copy?" A broken, heavily distorted voice crackled through the speaker. Fiona. Massive front. Grounded. Cannot reach. Hold tight. Then, the radio died completely. The battery packs were already failing, as the ambient temperature inside the cabin began to plummet. Without the generator to power the main heating coils, the wood stove was her only source of heat, and she only had enough dry wood for 24 hours. Over the next day and a half, the cabin transformed into a freezer. Frost began to creep up the interior walls, turning the logs stark white. Fiona had moved her mattress directly against the wood stove, feeding it sparingly with her remaining logs. She wore every layer of clothing she owned, but the cold was a living, breathing entity, slowly suffocating her. As her own body temperature began to dangerously dip, exhaustion setting in, a bizarre reversal of roles occurred. Ghost, now fully revived and fueled by the nutrient-dense formula, possessed a furnace-like internal body heat. The cub instinctively crawled inside Fiona's parka, pressing its impossibly warm, rhythmic little body against her chest. That small, vibrating heat source over her heart was the only thing keeping Fiona's blood pumping as she drifted in and out of a freezing delirium. By the third night, the wood was gone. Fiona threw her wooden chairs into the stove, then her books, then her research journals. By 4 a.m., the fire finally choked and died. The darkness was absolute. The cold was absolute. Fiona closed her eyes, clutching the purring cub, accepting that neither of them would see the sunrise. She drifted into the painless, terrifyingly warm hallucination that precedes freezing to death. Thud. Fiona's eyes fluttered. It sounded like a hallucination. Scratch. Thud. Roar. It wasn't the wind. It was coming from the roof. Specifically, right above the snowed-in entryway. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of heavy metal striking ice echoed from outside. Human voices, muffled, shouting over the dying wind. Dig here. David, get the auger. The thermal hit is right below this drift. Fiona couldn't move her limbs. She could only listen as the thick ice blocking her door was shattered. The heavy door was kicked open, and the blinding beam of a high-powered flashlight pierced the darkness of her cabin. Abby! It was Mason Sterling, his face wrapped in frost-covered neoprene, followed by David Miller, their chief search and rescue pilot. They rushed over, immediately wrapping her in an active heating thermal foil and deploying portable propane heaters. We got you, Abby. You're okay, Mason panted, his eyes wide with disbelief as Ghost poked his little spotted head out of Fiona's jacket and hissed at the men. Good Lord. Is that an amour? Hours later, inside the heated cabin of the rescue helicopter, Fiona was hooked up to an IV of warm fluids. Ghost was safely secured in a heated carrier crate beside her. She looked at Mason, her voice barely a croak. How did you find me? Fiona asked. The cabin was completely buried. The snowdrifts are 20 feet high out there. I didn't have a beacon. Mason exchanged a long, bewildered look with David. Abby, Mason said softly, pulling off his heavy gloves. We had the chopper in the air the second the winds dropped below 50 miles per hour. But you're right. The landscape was wiped clean. We couldn't distinguish your cabin's roof from the rest of the taiga. We were about to turn back for refueling. So, what happened? We saw a heat signature on the infrared scanner. David chimed in from the cockpit, shaking his head. We thought it was a wolf pack. But when we dropped altitude, we saw it. Saw what? Fiona pressed. An adult Amur leopard, Mason said, his voice laced with awe. A massive, fully grown female. She was standing her ground in the middle of a negative 71 degrees Celsius whiteout, right on top of a massive mound of snow. She was digging frantically at the ice, refusing to move even when the chopper hovered directly over her. She was trying to dig down to the exhaust vent of your cabin. Fiona's breath caught in her throat. We landed 50 yards away, Mason continued. We thought we'd have to scare her off with flares, but she just stopped digging. She looked at us, looked down at the hole she had made, and then slowly walked off into the tree line. She led us right to your front door. Fiona looked down at the crate where the tiny, spotted cub was sleeping peacefully. The mother hadn't abandoned her baby. She had tracked the scent of her cub through a blinding, lethal storm. But realizing she couldn't break through the reinforced steel and packed ice to retrieve him, she had done the only thing she could. She had made herself a beacon, an anomaly on an otherwise empty landscape, guiding the noisy metal birds of the humans right to the doorstep of the woman who had kept her baby alive. It was an impossible convergence of maternal instinct, survival, and fate. "She's still out there," Fiona whispered, a tear escaping and trailing down her cheek. "I know," Mason said gently. "And once this storm breaks completely, we're going to help you return him to her. I think she knows he's in good hands for now." Fiona looked out the window of the helicopter at the endless, frozen expanse of Yakutia. The world out there was brutal, unforgiving, and utterly deadly. But as she placed her hand against the plastic grate of the carrier and felt a tiny paw press back against her fingers, she knew that even in the coldest place on Earth, the warmth of a miracle could still take root.